It's great to see everybody from all over the country with us this morning, and a very warm welcome to the first of our online Eco-Church sessions. We're so pleased you could join us today, especially in this season of creation, when churches are reflecting on their roles and responsibilities in the care of creation and how they can take action for climate justice. My name is Eileen, and I'm a member of Beulah URC in Cardiff. And as the Green Advocate for the Synod of Wales, I'm part of a small environmental steering group. The Synod of Wales is aiming to become an eco-synod and is hoping that local churches will also engage with the Eco-Church scheme and work towards gaining awards themselves. There are currently 5 churches within the Synod with Eco-Church awards, and we're very pleased to have representatives from some of those churches with us here this morning. So Helen, Liz, Rosie will be with us in the breakout rooms and will be sharing their experiences with you. As a means of supporting and encouraging each other along this Eco-Church journey within the Synod, we felt it might be useful for churches to have some clear ideas and starting points for action. And we hope that the series will provide suggestions and discussions around steps churches may like to consider, and each session will focus on one of the 5 Eco-Church areas. So this morning we're concentrating on lifestyle, and we're so grateful to Caroline Pomeroy, the Director of Climate Stewards, for giving up her time to speak with us today. I think I'll leave it up to her to describe the work of Climate Stewards, and then she will give us an overview of Eco-Church before talking about how we as individuals and as churches can calculate, manage and offset our carbon footprints. I would just like to let you know that our next session will be on community and global engagement, and it will be held in the first week of December. So please do look out for final details about this session and also spread the word. This series is open to any interested individuals and churches, and we would welcome wide participation. And it's great to see people from all over Wales and outside Wales here with us this morning. So coming back to this morning then, I know you're as eager as I am to hear what Caroline has to share with us. After her presentation, we'll move back into our breakout rooms for some discussion. Then there will be a short tea break before we gather again for questions and for Caroline's concluding thoughts. So I'll hand you over now to Caroline. Thank you.
So good morning, and thank you for inviting me. Thank you, Eileen, for inviting me along to speak to you today. I think I'm just putting my watch somewhere visible so I can see it. I think she said about 20 minutes to tell you a bit about the things that she's summarised. So yes, just to say my name is Caroline. My day job, as it were, is that I'm the Director of Climate Stewards. Climate Stewards is a charity which is part of the Arusha network. And Arusha is the organisation that runs Eco-Church, so that's the connection there. And I will tell you a bit about Climate Stewards work as I go through the talk. I also have a very part-time role with the Diocese of Bath and Wells in Somerset. I've been working with them quite a long time now. It started actually when I did a master's degree some years ago now in climate change, impacts and sustainability. And one of the things I had to, my research project was looking at why churches do or don't engage with the green agenda. What are the catalysts and the barriers to taking creation care seriously? So that's my kind of background, and I spend quite a lot of time working talking with churches, this kind of thing, running workshops, etc., on and around Eco-Church. So I thought I would be helpful this morning to very, very briefly outline what's the problem, why are we here today. From having met some of you in the breakout rooms and listened to Eileen's introduction, I suspect this is all old hat. You know all this, so I won't spend a long time on it. Why should we as Christians be bothering about this? Well, we're not just the green club of whatever our town or community is. Something about Eco-Church and how we can get involved, and then something about our lifestyles, as Eileen said. How can we live better? Which I think will be something that we want to talk about in the plenary rooms. So very briefly, I don't need to tell you this, but we are emitting more than our fair share of carbon dioxide, of greenhouse gases. This photograph was clearly taken before lockdown, and it was very interesting, wasn't it, during lockdown, we will all have observed the fact that as we were all forced, and I recognise that many of you in Wales are being back into this position where suddenly road traffic slows, and general activities of life slow, and it makes it so obvious, doesn't it, the correlation between human activity and climate change. This is what we're doing. We are emitting greenhouse gases into the atmosphere, which of course are causing warming. This is an interesting graph. Some of you may have seen these. They're called the global warming stripes, and they're produced by a climate scientist, and he updates them every year. But it's quite challenging, isn't it, the way in which in the last 100 years or more, the rate of warming is increasing. The depth of the red on the right hand side is very, very clear and very profound. So we are warming our planet. We are warming it faster and faster at the moment, and that is having major consequences. This was taken beginning of this year, if you recall, the big fires in Australia. This was on the edge of Sydney, I think, but just terrifying. I mean, terrifying images of people who are like us. I mean, sometimes I think people think that climate change is affecting people far away. Well, clearly Australia is far away, but the reality is that we are all being impacted all around the planet. And as it comes closer and more frequent, we've got fires in California, as we know at the moment. I think increasingly, and I'm sure you're aware of this in your own conversations, climate change is thankfully beginning to be acknowledged as an issue and being taken more seriously. And of course, it's not just heat, it's not just warming. We've had extreme winters. That was a photograph taken on the east coast of America when they had a very extreme cold spell a couple of years ago. Wildfires in Europe a few years ago in the summer, when there was something like 30,000, I think, additional deaths attributed just to heat. Hurricanes, typhoons, things which cause mass destruction, and all sorts of interesting things going on, like the fact that they're slowing down. I think you will have read that, and causing more destruction as the climate warms. Droughts, clearly, and floods. That was a photograph taken on the Somerset Levels, close to where I live. A couple of years ago, you will remember there was a huge flooding on the Somerset Levels. So these are again, these impacts are being felt close to home as well as far away. And of course, they impact the most vulnerable first and worst. For most vulnerable in our own society, who are least able to cope, but particularly the most vulnerable around the world, our global neighbours. All of these different things, droughts and floods, irregular rainfall, rising sea levels, shortage of water, salinification as the seawater rises underneath fresh water, crop failure, food prices, and that causes migration. There are terrifying estimates of the numbers of climate migrants that we are expecting to see in the coming decades. So huge impacts which we cannot ignore. And what are we doing about it? Well, again, I'm sure you'll know all of this before, but as a result of the Paris Climate Agreement, we, as a group of nations around the world, we committed to trying to limit global climate change to less than 1.5 degrees above pre-industrial levels. At the moment, this is an image from a very interesting website called Climate Action Tracker, which does lots of, they're constantly updating this to check where we're at the moment. At the moment, with our pledges and targets internationally, we're on track to hit 2.7 degrees above pre-industrial levels by the end of the century, and our current policies are don't even meet that. So we've got a long way to go. There's a lot of work still to be done, and that's true in our countries as well as around the world. And just to add to the gloom and doom, climate change is not the only issue. A colleague of mine sent me this just the other day. I was talking to a colleague actually in Canada, and he said, "Have you seen this cartoon?" And I said, "No." But clearly, we are all quite rightly preoccupied with COVID at the moment. But it is not the only problem. And I think many people would say that climate change and the implications of climate change could be much, much worse. And biodiversity collapse, which of course is impacted by climate change, but not only climate change, could also have huge, huge, huge impacts for us as humans around the world. So just to put things in context, it's hard to do this at the moment, I think, and I'm sure we'll have these conversations later. How do we raise the flag for climate change when people are dealing with much more immediate problems? But it's good to be reminded that it is not the only thing. And of course, as I said, it's not just climate change. The World Wildlife Fund Living Planet report came out just the other day, telling us that since 1970, which I think is probably well within most of our lifetimes, average wildlife populations have declined by 2/3. So 60 something, I think it's 68% of all wildlife, that's all creatures on Earth, have disappeared within our lifetimes, which is a really very sobering statistic. If you haven't seen that report, it's online, you can download it. It's fascinating. We are losing our insect population. Again, as you know, there was a report a couple of years ago which talked about this. And we've all noticed the implications, the impact of that, but insects are vital to all life on Earth. We are filling our seas with plastic. They say that by 2050, the plastic in the ocean will outweigh the fish in the sea. Again, it's an issue that I'm sure you're all fully aware of, but it's another part of humans' contribution to the mess that we are in. And we're polluting we are emitting poisonous gases and particulates. This is a picture of a little girl who died a couple of years ago in London. She used to walk along the South Circular Road in London to school every day. And she died of asthma, complications around asthma. And her parents, or her mother, took the council to court, and it was the first successful decision whereby a death had been attributed to pollution. So it was kind of quite a landmark decision, a very, very sad one for this family, clearly. And there are more and more of us. Again, when I was born in the 1960s, there were somewhere around 3 billion people on the planet. There are currently around 7.3, I think. By the end of the century, we're likely to have 10 or so. Clearly, our impact on the planet is a multiplier of two things. One is how much we consume and emit, and the other is how many of us there are. So there are more and more people consuming more and more stuff. So there are multiple challenges that we are facing as a species. And finally, we are losing our connection with the natural world. This is a beautiful book that some of you may have seen called The Lost Words. It was produced in response to the fact that they had recently reissued the Oxford Junior Dictionary a few years ago, and they had taken out a lot of words like conker and kingfisher and buttercup and all sorts of natural things, and they'd replaced them with things like swipe and bite and computer terminology. And this was a group of writers and artists who produced this book to make the point that we're losing our connection with nature, and that, I think, is contributing to this disconnection with the natural world. So that's where we're at. As Christians, why should we care? So my green Bible, which I think I've got here, you can see it, was given to me a few years ago. And I don't know if anybody's seen it, but in the green Bible, the compilers have highlighted in green all the words, all the passages which talk about the natural world. So they're anything to do with the air, the water, the land, the sea, crops, etc. It's all there. And there are over 2,000 references to the natural world. And I think that what many people feel is that we as Christians have kind of forgotten that. We tend to read the Bible with dark glasses on to sort of filter out the bits about the natural world. I mean, that, of course, it was written in a time of an agrarian world view, where clearly all the sort of metaphors and things would have been to do with nature and the land. But I think it does tell us something about God's priorities. And I think that the Bible is an earthy book, and that it will help us all if we can rediscover that and communicate that in our churches and congregations. So very, very briefly, the Bible at the beginning talks about us having, Genesis talks about mankind having dominion over all the earth. Now, of course, dominion is not domination. Dominion means loving heavenly service, like Jesus was a king, but a servant king. So if we are kings over the earth, as it were, then we are kings who serve. We have a lot of power, but we also need to submit that to God. So mankind has dominion over the earth. But at the same time, in Genesis 2, we're called to be good stewards, to till and keep, to work and take care of the land. God made a promise. He made many promises in the Bible, but one of the most famous is the promise with Noah, never again to destroy the land. And that was when he sent the rainbow, if you recall. And that passage really, I think, tells us, is one of many passages, but it tells us that God is committed to this land, to this place, and he cares for it, and he has made this covenant. The Bible is God's words. It encompasses God's words. I think Martin Luther said God had two books: his book of words, the Bible, and his book of works, the earth, the created order. There is a great deal that we can learn about God through just seeing the world around us, and the Bible is full of that. If you read the Psalms, I mean, they're full of the telling of the wonder of the Lord through what he has made around us. So revelation, God is revealed through his creation. And of course, Jesus came, for God so loved the world. Jesus came to reveal God to us. And at the end of Mark's gospel, we are told to go and preach the good news, not to all people, but to all creation. So the Bible, the gospel is good news to people, but to the world as well, to the whole created world. And finally, I think the Bible talks about God creating a new heaven and a new earth, and that's a very earthy thing. People get very confused, I think, about being whisked off into the clouds, but I think there's a great deal in the Bible about the fact that God is going to rebuild the earth here and now, as it were. We don't quite know what that will look like, but it's going to be renewed rather than destroyed. There is a nice quote that I like from Bishop James Jones, who tells us that Jesus will come to renew all things. And in the meantime, Christians are called to participate in the earthing of heaven by doing God's will on earth. And finally, of course, we're told to love our neighbour. And if we really love our neighbours, our global neighbours, and our future neighbours, our children and our children's children, then I think we will be caring for creation too. Rob Frost, a Christian evangelist some years ago, said this. He said, when Christians take the earth seriously, then people take the gospel seriously. So in all of what we do around creation care, I think it's good to remember this. I think, and I'm sure you've seen this too, but it's a great way of engaging with the community around you and getting people to see that you are serious about caring for creation. So Eco-Church, again, from my little group I've just been chatting with in the Breakout Group, I think many of you are familiar with Eco-Church. It started as Eco-Congregation. It was rebranded as Eco-Church a few years ago. It's basically a toolkit for churches to see where they're at in terms of caring for creation in all aspects of church life, to go through a survey. The survey is at the heart of it. Lots of questions around different areas of church life. And the system invites you to form a group of people in your church. It's really great to do it with others. It's best to do it with others, not on your own. It's more encouraging, and it's what you want to do is bring people along with you. And the idea is that churches will sign up, and then they will go through this questionnaire form, and they will assess whether they are bronze, silver, or gold level. I'll tell you a bit more about it now. So it's online. It's an entirely online system now. I think, assuming that everyone here is online and Zooming, then that won't be as daunting as it probably was a year ago for many people. But it's very straightforward and easy to use. And as I say, the heart of it is this eco survey, which has 5 sections: worship and teaching. That's everything to do. I will come back to that. Worship and teaching, management of church buildings, management of church land, community and global engagement, and lifestyle. So those are the 5 sections. So the teaching and the worship and teaching will be not just what's preached from the front, but what the small groups are doing, what the children's work is doing, what you're praying for, everything to do with the songs you're singing, how creation is reflected in those. Church buildings, that could be buying clean energy, it could be putting panels on the roof, it could be what kind of coffee cups you use, it could be use of water and waste, everything to do with the building, the light bulbs, etc. Cutting down drafts, warming up pews, 101 things. Land, clearly, it's how you care for any land in your control. So you might be having allotments, you might be putting up bug boxes, you might be building bug hotels with the children, you might be changing your mowing regime, lots of things you can do around the land that you own or control. This is a tool which Climate Stewards has developed recently. It's called 360 Carbon, which is an online calculator for churches to use. So this is free to use. It's basically a carbon calculator for a whole church community. So this will help you assess where you are at as a community in terms of your managing your buildings and your land. So it goes through lots of questions about, first of all, about the church itself, how many people, how often do you meet, all those kinds of things. And then it goes through, you can see at the top, your energy bill, all of your energy consumption, transport, so that's transport for your staff and transport for your congregation. Food, what food you eat and share. Clearly this is written for pre-COVID times, but we hope we'll get back to all of this. And then expenditure, so all the other things that you spend money on as a church, whether that's paper for the photocopier or fuel for the mower or whatever. Waste, and then finally it'll come up with a carbon footprint for your church. And the idea is it gives you a really good baseline to work from so that you can then change things in the future, look at where you're at and see where things could be improved. So that's a useful tool to know about. The fourth section is about community and global engagement. This is going back to Eco-Church. This was an example from my own town where we got engaged with the local MP. We organised workshops. We just tried to raise the awareness of climate change in and through the churches. And the fifth area is lifestyle. And I'm sorry, I've taken a while to get here, but there is so much we can do in our own lifestyles. And of course, as a church, we have a huge potential to impact far more people. If we all go home and start changing our lifestyles, that will have a much bigger impact than just what we do on a Sunday morning. We'll come to in a moment to a few different bits of lifestyle, but I think there is so much information out there, it's almost impossible to know where to start. The key things I think we need to be thinking about are energy use. That the fastest way to cut our carbon footprint as a household is to switch to a renewable energy supplier. We may not be able to put solar panels on our roof, but we can buy renewable energy. There are lots of ways to do that. We can talk about that in the groups. Clearly, transport is a big one. Air travel is the biggest individual thing. If we can find other ways to travel or travel less, that's great. Public transport, walking, cycling, fantastic. And the other big area of our lives is our food consumption, and eating less meat and dairy, eating, as I always say, lower down the food chain. So just changing the ratio. We don't all have to become vegans, but eating more vegetables, more pulses, more grains, and less meat and dairy will have a massive impact multiplied up. There are lots and lots and lots of other things, and we can talk about those later, but those would be the three key things I would encourage you to think about, would be switching energy supply, thinking about your travel, and eating, just changing the balance of your diet. Going back to Eco-Church, there's a lot of resources on their website. This is their resources page. So if you're interested in particular things as a church, you can download these information sheets from the website. And then some of you I know have already got your awards. The church will be given an award, a bronze, silver, or gold level award. And clearly the criteria for getting the awards become more and more difficult or more and more challenging as you go up the levels. These awards are made from old recycled church pews, and you will be awarded one of those on reaching the required level. At the moment, there are over 2,000 churches in the UK signed up for Eco-Church, and about 900 have awards. I think Eileen mentioned Eco-Synod. That's the sort of the standard for a whole group of churches together, and the Eco-Synod criteria include these bullet points that to get a bronze Eco-Synod award, 10% of your churches need to be registered for Eco-Church, and 5% needs to have been awarded bronze status. And then to go to silver and gold, those percentages go up. You need to have an environmental policy for the synod. You need to get an Eco-Church award for if you have any offices of the synod and any land that you control. You need to embed creation care in continuing ministerial development, and you need to manage your investments ethically if you have them. You need to show that you're working with other synods and faith groups on these issues, and you need to reward and celebrate environmental initiatives. So that's briefly what you need to do for those. Just before we go into the groups, I'm looking at the time. You wanted me to talk about lifestyle at home, and I've mentioned some things about what we can do at home and how that will make a difference. This is a very simple way of measuring our carbon footprints that we have developed at Climate Stewards, and we use. If I was with you today, I would have my Lego bricks. In fact, I've got them right here. You can see them. You see them? My Duplo bricks. My children's. In fact, these were secondhand to my children who are now grown up. So again, these are not single-use plastic. We developed this tool as a way of helping people understand their carbon footprint and the impact of different changes you can make in your own life. And we found it really helpful. You can access the information about this on the Climate Stewards website. I will give you the link later. And it's really quite a fun way to engage other people with this, maybe your youth group or other people in your household, just to think, what could I do? But essentially, each brick of Duplo is half a ton of carbon dioxide. So this is the average UK carbon footprint, which is around about 8 tons. It depends exactly how you measure it, but it's around about 8 tons of carbon dioxide per person per year. And the different colours are the different activities. So the blue one is flights. Now that is the average UK number of flights that people take domestically. So it's a rather unusual, it's not a very helpful number. As soon as you start to fly anywhere serious, then it will go up a lot. So if you went to New York and back, it will be 2 tons of carbon dioxide, just about 2 tons per person. So suddenly that's put on 2 tons of carbon dioxide onto your footprint. The red block, which is 1.5 tons, that's household emissions. So that's your energy consumption in the house and all the other bits and pieces in your household. And this is all per capita. So this is divided back by the average number of people in the house. The white column is your car mileage. So this is the average UK car mileage, 8,500 miles in a car. This bit is your food. And it's quite interesting, isn't it, to see how the food is actually the tallest of the bricks. So this is, again, this is per person. So this is an average UK diet, which is quite heavy in meat. Although what they define as quite heavy in meat is 2 sausages a day. Now, I've been talking to people who've said, gosh, I eat a lot more than that. So you could be even higher. But soon as, obviously, if you eat less meat, you come down a bit. If you eat no meat, you come down a bit more. If you become a vegan, I think you get about to there. You're not going to get much further than that. That you would probably be dead after that. That's probably clearly our food has a carbon footprint, but it makes a big difference what type of food we're eating. The grey pile is, we call it government services. So it's everything that we can't do anything about that. That's just our proportion of roads, schools, hospitals, all that kind of stuff that just happens for us. And the yellow pile is what we call stuff. So it's basically everything else we buy. It's all our consumption. So it's shopping. And if you're someone who loves to shop, that's your hobby. Again, COVID has changed things quite a lot, but there's still online shopping, isn't there? If you're the sort of person who replaces your gadgets as soon as the next one comes out, if you're someone who loves to go out for a coffee or buy new things or maybe refurbish rooms in your house, that kind of stuff, then you'll probably be up here. If you're someone who loves to go to charity shops, who likes to make, do and mend, who waits till your phone actually dies until you actually replace it, that kind of thing, then obviously this column is going to come down. So it's just a really interesting way of looking at how our consumption affects our carbon footprint all the way through these different areas of our lives. I think my time is up. I'm going to stop there. I'm not quite sure what happens next. I'll let somebody else do that bit.
Welcome back, everyone. You will now be placed into breakout groups for discussion. Then we will be having the 10-minute tea break. And then when we come back, the facilitators of the groups will feed back first into the plenary session. And if there's any time left after that, we'll open the floor to questions for Caroline. Okay, see you all soon. Okay, I'm going to hand over now to Judy, and Caroline. Judy's going to chair the session.
Okay, welcome back. I'm going to ask the facilitators of the groups just to kind of share some of the discussion that happened in your groups, so we get a feel of the discussions that happened, and then maybe any questions that came out from your groups, so we can ask maybe Caroline to answer those questions if she can. So I'm going to start, I think, with Rosie's group. So Rosie, do you want to kind of share your discussion and any question that came out from that?
Well, we had quite a deep discussion, actually. We started talking about how the COVID world has sort of shrunk everybody's world, and people have stopped having a world view. You know, a lot of people have become very focused on themselves, and not in a good way, in, you know, well, how can we help to make this place better, but more of a sort of survival thing. And so then we had one of our members of our group is from Madagascar, Miara, and he gave us a quite a devastating sort of account of how, you know, perhaps the choices that we make can impact other parts of the world. So he talked about how the wildlife has collapsed there, 80% of the rainforest has gone, you know, a dreadful situation there, and yet they're still finding new species and things. As this sort of devastation is happening, there are still other things that are more positive, but the problem is humanity and poverty, and perhaps the choices that we're making here in our sort of detached world are having huge impacts that we don't even see or recognize. A lot of it's to do with debt, but a very simple one would be something along the lines of, you know, this choice of the vehicles that we drive, those lovely green vehicles that we're buying with the new batteries and everything. Where are they getting the materials from the batteries? It's from places like Madagascar, which is why the rainforest is being devastated to find those materials. So, you know, it was actually a very sort of, well, quite a very powerful conversation, really. And we sort of came round to the thinking, well, maybe this time when we are focusing in, we should be looking at perhaps how do we find out about these you know, questions that we don't know the answers to. Where do we get the answers to you know, the other side of being green, which perhaps is more devastating than we realize. So that's
okay. Wow, that's quite a thought. I had not even considered the battery aspect of, you know, the electric cars. That's and it's a good insight from a different culture, which is really helpful. Thanks. So Liz, your group, did you have a good discussion?
Yes, we did. We were just really getting into it when we were sent back. That we had a very good discussion. I think what came across in the group was how different it is in different kinds of churches and different kinds of places. The difference maybe between rural areas, busy towns and large cities, particularly in the extent to which people are maybe aware of the problems. The difficulty and challenge of engaging the majority in a church. Some people felt that they were maybe trying hard to pull people in and to interest people and motivate them to do something, but that really was quite difficult. People were rather skeptical sometimes or didn't particularly want to be involved. So, and especially maybe small memberships in some places, or just a lack of interest. The issue maybe of trying to work outside your own church in these situations with community groups. Certainly one of our members has a town group which where churches are working quite closely with community groups involved in environmental issues. That might be a way of strengthening things. And also the issue of maybe not starting where it is most difficult. You don't have to do the most difficult things first, maybe being able to pull people into easy, less threatening or enjoyable, and enjoyable things that might motivate them to see it as not just a serious drudgy business, but something where they can be fellowship and community. Might be some way of cracking some of this. But certainly the issue of getting everyone behind it, and particularly with COVID, a number of members had felt that their work has been quite badly affected by COVID, as you would expect, because they've had to pull back from some of the plans that they had. It's thrown some of the issues into the background in a sense, because everything else seems suppressing. So I think really the variety of how difficult it is in different places to do things, it's not the same for everybody trying to tackle some of this, was what came over to me. So.
Yeah.
But others maybe add things in there.
Thanks, that's really helpful. Helen, do you want to share what your group was talking about?
Looking at the priorities the speaker mentioned and demonstrated with her Lego, we can see what things we might be able to have some effect on, including things like renewable energy use. But one of the main things, and what we focused on, was on the food that we eat, because that was having a larger effect on our impact on the environment. We need to eat less meat and dairy, and to encourage this can be difficult without appearing to be judgmental of people, and without necessarily saying you have to be one thing or another, but to encourage small steps. We also talked about the importance of allowing children to develop a different way of eating from perhaps what has been the case for our generation. So it was seen that small steps in all these various things would be doable and possible. It was also mentioned that there was a need for global balance in resources, and this seems a big issue, but again, something which perhaps we can make small contributions to. And there was also, we looked or mentioned stewardship theology, not seeing man over creation, but as part of it.
That's really helpful. That's quite a lot of things. And Eileen, your group, can you share what your group discussed?
Yes, well, we similar to the previous facilitators, really, we felt that Caroline had given us so many interesting things to talk about that 10 minutes was barely enough to get started, really. We particularly liked her thought that we should be loving our neighbours, not only our neighbours today, but our future neighbours as well. And we thought that was a very useful concept to hold on to when we were thinking about our actions. We did sort of cover three main areas, I suppose. The first one, similar to Liz, I think, was somebody said it was difficult to know how to actually get started and engage other members of the congregation. And then Janet from Swansea suggested that, like Liz said, sort of starting small, maybe with gardening, and that was a nice sort of community thing that people could do together. Maybe a bit of recycling, and also trying to set actions within the context of the faith. So try to use Christian aid resources, and that's something that I've always found useful. Actually, is a good way of trying to proceed with these sort of environmental issues. Somebody else said that they thought that no matter what we did sort of in the eco-church context, it all seemed very small compared to what was actually needed globally. And again, we agreed that maybe engaging with politicians was absolutely vital, because all these actions need to be done on sort of governmental scale as well.
Mhm.
And we did discuss the organisation Hope for the Future and how useful they were in helping churches to speak to their politicians. And then I think our third main issue was the problem of how to reduce our carbon footprint and our energy consumption and make our churches into green spaces when we can be very constrained by finances, and also other churches, some churches are constrained by being a listed building, or, you know, and we did feel that really buildings, I know that there is a separate area for buildings in Eco Church, but buildings sort of spills onto carbon footprints as well, and that, you know, they are one of the main issues around reducing our energy consumption. So those were our three sort of main areas.
Okay, that's really interesting, and it's interesting that the groups were all very different in their kind of discussion, which is maybe helpful to Caroline, but maybe not. So we had looking at the COVID impact, looking at the differences between rural and urban engagement, the food we eat, and also just how we get started, and actually working outside of church, so looking at politics. Caroline, is there anything you want to share from all of those discussions? And then we'll open up to maybe questions that people have got burning in their heart to ask.
Yeah, I mean, just so interesting hearing everybody's experiences, and it's really encouraging to me that so many people are, you know, already on this journey. I think most people here clearly, that's perhaps why you're here. You're thinking about this stuff and doing many interesting things. And just a few kind of slightly random thoughts on those points. Interesting thing about about the batteries and the impact on Madagascar and other countries. Clearly, that is a huge issue. It's everything is a balance, isn't it? And it's really hard to get a perspective on that balance. But I think, you know, it's really important to think about reducing before we just before we sorry, I'm trying to get the hierarchy. There's the reduce, reuse, recycle, that hierarchy that most people are familiar with. But what I like is somebody has suggested that the first one is refuse. So it's actually refuse, then reduce, reuse, recycle. So actually, do we even need it in the first place? And I think the battery example is a bit of an example. I mean, yes, electric cars, electric transport is clearly a significant way in which we can reduce our emissions. But the first thing to do is to cut down our need to travel in the first place, you know, and that will mean that some of us won't be buying electric cars, we'll be catching the bus, for example. So, you know, I think it's trying to think through all of those options. So that's one thing to think about, and that whole issue of embedded emissions. I mean, for example, myself, I haven't got an electric car. We keep talking about it as a family, but we have a very small, very efficient petrol car. Petrol car, and we try to bicycle a lot, and so it feels like to actually buy a great big new shiny battery car with all of those embedded emissions at the moment in our current situation as a family doesn't make sense. So I think it's trying to be intelligent about these things and read around the subject. Someone talked about doing research, and there is masses of information on the internet. You know, obviously, you know, there is lots of good information out there. It's hard sometimes to pick your way through it, but this is a good time, as you say, we're all locked down, so let's use it for researching things. The food issue is always controversial. It's difficult. Where we've come to as a family is, again, a phrase I stole from somewhere else, where we call it meat as a treat. So, you know, just trying to, we're not vegan, we're not vegetarian, but we're eating much less meat than we used to, and trying to replace dairy products, trying to get some balance in there. Engaging the majority of people in your congregation, that's always a difficult one. I think people have talked about litter picking and gardening and feeding the birds and saving money. You know, if you can find ways where you're actually saving money, like changing the light bulbs, you know, that always appeals to the treasurer. So finding a way of engaging more people by doing different things that will be sort of quick wins. I think that's really helpful. Ruth Valerio, who some of you will have come across, she in the footer to her emails, it always says many little steps, you know, many little steps. And there is this issue about, yes, we all need to do our bit. Yes, in a sense, it's a drop in the ocean, but lots of drops make a big pool. And someone else talked about campaigning, and I think we have to engage at a political level, whether that's local politics or national. All of those letters to our MP, Hope for the Future is a great organisation to engage with. They've got lots of resources to help churches engage with their political leaders. It does make a difference, and it's really worth thinking about. And the fact that things like collecting plastic, that may not solve all the problems around climate change or biodiversity loss or anything else, but it's finding ways of it's entry points for people. If people get passionate about plastics, they start to think about all the other issues around, concerning the environment. So I think all of these things are good, whatever works for you, really. Yeah, those are my initial thoughts.
That's really helpful. One of the things that I'm quite passionate about, I'm a Children and Youth Development Officer for the Synod, so I'm quite passionate about children and youth work, and I'm working with a group of people to look at how we can make the eco-church process more child-friendly and in line with eco-schools and these sort of things. So I maybe have an email conversation with you about that.
Yeah, can we talk about that? Yeah, I'd love to have a conversation about that. Yeah.
But one of the things in Wales, I think, is key, is about the fact that we do actually have a future generations legislation. So we always consider what the future generations are, the decisions we make, how they impact. And maybe in churches we should think about that a bit more. Are people, is there anybody wanting to ask a question or Caroline? If you do, I think raising your hand would be helpful in the, not physically, but raising your hand in it virtually would be a good way to do it. So if anyone's got a burning question to ask to Caroline, I think it's a good time to do it now. No. Oh yes, Mark Rogers.
Sorry, it's just to add to the debate about batteries, just balance it a little bit, because I'm a bit of an EV freak. Just to say that the vast majority of batteries and the cobalt and the lithium that's mined for those are for the throwaway products like phones and laptops, and that many of the car batteries that they're using and developing at the moment can be reused later on for power walls and etc. In other areas for electric storage, which is good. And of course, cars can now be solar as well, with solar panels on the top. So, and the bus that you mentioned could be electric, not an ICE vehicle. So, yeah, I think it's the throwaway culture of the phones and the laptops and everything else that you mentioned previously that's the bigger problem than some of the new transport developments that are coming out.
Okay, thanks for that, Mark. Julia Bartholomew, you got a question?
I mentioned population growth, and it seems to be quite an politically correct topic. Whenever I bring it up, people brush it aside. And I'm just wondering, what is a positive response to the issues of population growth on a micro and macro level?
Ooh, that's an interesting conversation. You're absolutely right. It is the elephant in the room. I've been quite passionate about it for quite a long time. And as Julia, you will know, my husband, in fact, works for another charity which delivers family planning. It does not impose family planning, gives people choice. And I think that's the key thing, is that in the developing world, there are something like 200 million women who don't have access to family planning. And if we wanted to support charities and organizations that help that to happen, then that's a great way to start. But in terms of how we talk about population in this country, I always mention it especially when I'm talking to young people. Most of us here have made those decisions already. It's too late, really. But I think it's just important to mention it. For me and my husband as a couple, we made a decision to have no more than 2 children for that reason. As a principle of Christian stewardship, we felt that replacement was a reasonable kind of middle ground. There are, as you will know, Christians who and many others who are choosing, particularly sort of really keen environmentalists, who are choosing to have no children because they see a very bleak future. I think that everyone has to make their own decisions, but I think that it is definitely an issue that I think it's worth talking about. I think it's a very delicate topic, but I think it's perfectly reasonable to gently suggest to people that as I say, it's a multiplier. It's consumption times number of people will have equals impact, and it's to me it's a bit disingenuous to not talk about the numbers. David Attenborough, as many of you may have known, the recent program he did, he talked about population there. He's quite outspoken about it now. But we have to be very careful, because clearly what we don't want to be doing is to say that poor people, perhaps in the developing world, should have fewer children because we have had the luxury of having a comfortable life at the expense of them. So what's happening in the developing world is that many countries are now developing in a much cleaner way, but they quite rightly want to have access to all the things that we have access to. So what we perhaps need to be doing is enabling through third world support, enabling people to have access to clean energy and sustainable development.
Anybody else got any question to Caroline? Ken Woods.
Just to ask, is there evidence that working ecumenically could help churches?
Absolutely. Eco-Church is an ecumenical tool, and I think as with many other things, if we work together with other churches, that's often we're much more powerful. People see that, it's a really good witness, and we have more impact. I think that especially on these issues where these are shared issues, aren't they? From people of faith, people of no faith, people of other denominations. It's a great opportunity to work ecumenically on things that we agree on. We may not necessarily agree with our ecumenical partners on every tiny aspect of theology, but probably we will agree that we need to be caring for the world that we live in. So yes, do. Please do.
Okay, and Janet Nielsen.
Yes, our Anglican church nearby has a huge vicarage field, and before lockdown they were going to start a community project, planting trees to make an orchard, and we were going to be involved with that, but unfortunately that has had to be put on hold. But if any of you want to work with other churches who have more land than you, then what we're going to do is buy some fruit trees for them to be planted, and then they'll be putting bird feeders up and bird nesting boxes and things like that. And we've also just paid to have a tree planted in our local park, because we haven't got enough land for trees, so that will be planted in the winter. And we hope to go and see them planting it as proof towards our Gold Award, hopefully.
Fantastic. That's just brilliant. I love the idea of working both with your local other churches, but also in the local park. I think that that quote I said earlier from about when Christians take the earth seriously, then the world will take the gospel seriously. I think that's so powerful. And I think that when we're seen to be caring for our place locally and globally, that makes a huge difference. It has and opens up so many conversations. I think when we get out of our church buildings and into our local spaces, I think that's really powerful. Especially, I mean, Judy, thinking about young people, I think the next generation are so much more aware and concerned often than we are. So I think it's a really great way to demonstrate that and involve people.
There was a thing on the news a while ago about a little boy who wanted to plant trees for his in memory of people that had died. So that's just an example of that. Liz.
I just wanted to go back to that issue of involving people in the church and thinking of our own experience. And Eileen, I think, is too modest to talk about this, about Beulah, but the work that was done with other agencies like Friends of the Earth, Greenpeace, whatever, and local non-church organisations through festival work or local community events, I think drew in our own church members alongside, as well as drawing in people from the local community, because these other organisations had marvellous resources like polar bear suits and all sorts of things that you could use as props, and people who would come and speak. and presentations and resources that we would not on our own have had. And somehow not secularizing it, but secularizing that bit by joining in with other local groups made it easier for our church members to do these things as well. I don't quite know why, but just trying to sort of push that bit about trying to work with others in your local community, and more difficult in a rural area, as one of our people said. But I mean, there are huge riches of resources and expertise and talent in these other groups, and that helps to pull in the church members as well, I think. So just another thought about that.
Yeah, and there are lots of good examples of churches which perhaps have a graveyard or a churchyard, getting, you know, biodiversity blitzes and all sorts of people from the local community looking after or getting involved in the churchyard, doing children's work, bug boxes and bug hotels and bird boxes, all those kinds of things. There are lots of opportunities to use our land to engage more people and not to be frightened. I organised a workshop day last year in our local town, and we got somebody from the Somerset Wildlife Trust, and she came and spoke, and then she did some practical activities outside. And I think what was really impressive is that she was completely taken aback by all these church people who had come to gather to find out more. And she's constantly in touch with us now, saying, what can we do? How can we work together? You know, and that's the local wildlife trust. So these are great opportunities for engagement.
And fellowship and fun too. Lots of fun events that you can have. A polar bear suit, for example.
Yeah. Thanks. Eileen, you've got something.
Yes, well, I was initially, Janet, talking about the planting of trees. I was wondering if Caroline could just tell us a little bit about offsetting carbon and through climate stewards. But just before we come on to that, I was just going to follow up what Liz said, really, that when we did approach Greenpeace and Friends of the Earth and also RSPB and so on, it's always very interesting and gratifying that these organizations as well are very keen to engage with the church. So it is definitely a sort of two-way street. And they, as you say, Caroline, they do want to be involved with congregations and people who are genuinely interested in what they're doing as well.
So can you see that screen?
Yeah, thank you. Okay.
So this is just a quick image of what Climate Stewards does. So what we do is we help people to calculate their carbon footprint. We've talked a bit about the Duplo, but we've got an online carbon calculator as well. We encourage people to reduce it where they can, and then we encourage people to offset, which is basically pay some money to compensate for that carbon that they have emitted through their lifestyle, through their activities. And we use that money to fund projects overseas, which take that CO2 back out of the atmosphere or prevent it from going in the first place. This is our carbon calculator. You can find it on our website, www.climatestewards.org, and you can calculate. This is a flight from London to New York, for example, which will be responsible for 1.8 tons of CO2. So that was those 4 blocks of Duplo I put up earlier, which is, I think that's two tons. But that's the carbon emissions that one seat on the plane is responsible for. So it goes through all the different areas of our lives, travel, just like the church one I mentioned earlier, but for individuals. We then calculate how that carbon dioxide, a gas, is converted into, in the case of tree planting, is converted into absorbing CO2 and locking it up as wood in a tree. We do all the calculations around that. And then we fund projects overseas. So this is our first project in Ghana. These trees were planted in schools and communities now 12 years ago, but these photographs were taken when those trees were about 5 or 6 years old. Because we plant in the tropics, they grow very fast, which is fantastic, and they bring many local benefits to the communities in form, all the different benefits that we know that trees bring. So it's a fantastic scheme, and they love it. We also work in Uganda, funding water filters, which mean that families don't have to boil their water, but they can filter it, and that obviously reduces emissions from burning fuel. We fund cook stoves in Nepal and Peru. So again, these reduce emissions because people are not having to, you can see on the left, that woman cooking in a horrible smoky room with lots of health risks, but also using an enormous amount of fuel and rather inefficiently. So these cook stoves reduce the quantity. They save about 6 tons of carbon emissions per year per stove, which is enormous. We work with tree planting with smallholder farmers in Mexico. this farmer, it's the same man, the same tree, but it's 6 years on. You can see the difference in size of that tree. Again, they grow very quickly. And we work with churches and schools in Uganda, Kenya, and Tanzania, planting indigenous trees on their compounds. So all of our projects, I think, do two things. One is that they lock up carbon, and they're funded by, as I say, by people and churches and organizations and businesses offsetting. But they also bring hope and practical benefits to the local community, both in terms of income, livelihoods, in terms of health improvements, in terms of biodiversity. And I think just to leave you really with this image of hope, there was a few years ago, a group of theologians got together to talk about Christian hope in the face of an environmental crisis. And I think, you know, that was a few years ago, and at the moment it's no better, is it? You know, we had David Attenborough's program last week, which was pretty grim. You know, there was a little fragment of hope at the end, but the news we're getting is pretty overwhelming. So these theologians got together to say, what does it actually mean? What does hope really mean in the face of all these crises that we are facing, species extinction, climate change, etc. And they felt that the idea of our ultimate hope of salvation, being with God in heaven, just felt too distant in the face of all these different crises. And so what they were saying was that proximate hope, which is sort of immediate hope, is in short supply. There's not very much good news around the environment at the moment, although I hope that we in our churches and other places are contributing to make good news stories. It is hard to have proximate hope in a climate emergency. We do have that ultimate hope of being with God in heaven, that God will redeem his people, he will redeem the earth, and he will repair and heal the land. But in the meantime, what do? We've got this kind of gap between proximate hope being in short supply, ultimate hope being just too far away to grapple with. So they came up with this term robust hope. And that's the kind of hope which is deeper and more resilient than proximate hope. Best summed up in Romans chapter 5, verse 3-4, where it says that suffering produces perseverance, perseverance, character, and character, hope. And people, you know, you can think of people like Noah in the Bible who had that sort of robust hope. In the face of a crisis, he made a plan. So it helps us to, I think, this idea of robust hope is something just to hold on to, that we as Christians can have that hope. We have the ultimate hope that in God. Proximate hope is challenging, but I think that through our faith, through knowing that God walks with us through this, and through knowing that we can take lots and lots of small actions which will bring real hope to people in our own communities, people overseas, wherever, that we can demonstrate something of that hope that we are called to show as Christians. So I just wanted to leave you with that thought really for today, and thank you for having me.
Thank you, Caroline. I'm just going to bring it together. I say thank you, Caroline. Thank you for that. Thank you for this morning and for your time and the challenge and the information. There's much to take away from this. Thank you to Adrian for being our IT person, and to Eileen and Judy for helping us put all this together. The next session, as Eileen said at the beginning, will be during the first week of December, and will be about community and global engagement. I will send details out if you're happy to receive them, and you all have my email address now. And I just want to end with a short reflection prayer. Let us pray. In the beginning, God created. God's Spirit confronted the formless void. The Spirit of God came face to face with the darkness. And as the Spirit hovered, the deep shook. And as it shook, God spoke. And there was dark and there was light, divine light. Glory be to God who created light that was pleasant and good. God continued to speak. Day and night, earth and heaven, grass, herbs, fruit trees, seasons, days, months, years, moon and sun, water and whales, birds and beast. God looked at what he had brought forth by the word, and God spoke again and said, "This is good. This is very good." Glory be to God, whose creative word brings life. God spoke once more, and human beings came forth in the image of God, the divine image of the Creator, the Word, the Spirit, the image of togetherness, of shalom. And God blessed them and spoke, giving them to creation and creation to them, to dwell in, to explore, to care for, and to have their eyes open to the glory of God. Glory be to God, whose presence is always with us. Then a hush descended over the busyness of creation, as God's blessing fell upon the Sabbath. And God said, "Be still and know that I am God." Glory be to God, who blesses us with love, with peace, and with responsibility. In Jesus' name, amen. God bless you all. Shall we end by sharing the grace together? Grace of our Lord Jesus,
Christ,
the love of God,
God,
and the fellowship of
the
the Holy Spirit be with us all,
Be with us all
evermore.
evermore.
Amen.
Amen.
Amen. God bless. Take care.
Thank you.
See you again.
Thank you.
Bye-bye. Thank you, Caroline.
Thank you, Jason.
Bye.
Thank you, Jason.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you, Caroline.